Before the scribes folded their hands beneath stars that had no more names, there was a murmur, soft as ash, rising between two rivers. The Tigris, the Euphrates, veins of sacred earth, breath of the world's first dreaming. It begins not with conquest, nor thunder, but silence. A silence older than empires, older than war. In the hollow of a forgotten ziggurat, stone once echoed with priestly footsteps, offerings of barley and incense lifted toward a sky that never blinked. But now the wind alone recites the hymns. It slips through reed-lined canals and ancient courtyards, stirring dust that once wore crowns. It speaks of names nearly erased. Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, a triad of breath and clay, each syllable weighted with the sleep of centuries. This is the land where memory was first made flesh, where thought was shaped into cuneiform wedges, pressed into the skin of earth itself. A cradle, yes, but also a crucible. Here, humanity was not born, but called forth. A call whispered in myth and mud, shape, rule, building fall. What god stirred first? Was it Anu in his high heavens? Was it Enlil who strode with tempests in his lungs? Or was it Inanna, bright-eyed and blood-drenched, who danced between love and war? The myths do not agree, but they agree on this. The divine was never far. In Mesopotamia, the gods bled into walls and laws, into every harvest and every death. The rivers watched it all. They watched as the first cities rose like sacred oaths. Uruk with its towering walls and chants to Gilgamesh. Akkad with its ambitions carved in bronze. Babylon with its pride looped in gardens and stars. Each city a voice, each voice a psalm, each psalm a prophecy. This too shall fade. And yet, how they shimmered, those early kingdoms. Like dawn seen through smoke, like flame painted on wet stone. Beneath every throne a grave, behind every victory a god betrayed. Over every banquet a shadow. It is the rhythm of this place, this Eden turned empire, this garden turned graveyard. Not evil, no, not yet, but marked, touched. In the stillness of twilight, when the modern world forgets how to be quiet, the ghosts return. They come not with chains, but with questions. Who were we when the world was young? What did we worship before we feared? Why do we build, if not to be remembered? These questions do not belong to Mesopotamia alone. They belong to all of us. But it was here, in this land of mud-brick dreams and flood-born faith, that we first asked them. So we begin not with triumph, but with dusk, not with a hero's cry, but a dying breath. The call has sounded. It rises from the clay. It waits in the waters. It hums beneath the bones of cities lost to sand. Walk with me now, slowly as the priests once did, barefoot, reverent, through broken gates and sacred ruins, through epics half-remembered and gods who still sleep in stone. This is not just history, it is a return to the first story, to the first question, to the place where meaning began to take shape and crumble. Before the flood came, before kings wore crowns, before laws were written, there was only clay, soft and formless, waiting. A silence like breath before the first word. The gods leaned close to the earth then, whispering to dust, testing the edges of form and fate. In Mesopotamia, creation was not an act of love. It was necessity, labor, war. A divine fatigue echoed in the bones of the cosmos. The world began in blood. So say the ancient tablets. There was chaos, a roaring sea named Tiamat, whose salt water mingled with Apsu, the sweet abyss beneath. From their union, the first gods emerged, young, radiant, unruly. And as with all children of power, they rose too quickly. They sang too loud, they stirred the deep. The old ones grew weary. Apsu, father of the gods, sought silence through destruction. But he was slain by his own progeny, and from the spilling of divine blood, order was born. Tiamat, raging with grief, rose up in fury. She birthed monsters, hydras, demons, serpents of flame, and crowned Kingu, her chosen general. She became the Sea of Chaos once more. Then came Marduk, the champion of the younger gods, born with 4 eyes, fire in his breath, and a voice that shook mountains. He bargained, if he defeated the Chaos Mother, he would rule the heavens. They agreed, trembling, and so he faced Tiamat, the dragon of old. With net and storm, with incantation and spear, he split her like a carcass. From her corpse, he sculpted the heavens and the earth. Her ribs became the vault of sky, her tears the Tigris and Euphrates. Her roar still echoes in thunder. From the blood of Kingu, Marduk fashioned humankind, not for joy, not for beauty, but to serve, to carry the burden of the gods, to dig canals, raise temples, track stars, and spill wine in offerings. Creation, then, was a pact of servitude, but also of meaning. The first humans were not blank. They were clay, yes, but clay marked by stars and shadow. They knew their gods by name: Anu, king of heaven; Enlil, the breath of storms; Enki, keeper of wisdom and fresh water; Inanna, lady of battle and seduction. These were not abstractions. They were forces, faces, pulses in the land. Each god bore a city as their heart. Eridu, eldest of all, rose like a whisper beside the marshes, a shrine of reed and stone to Enki. It is said that from here, kingship first descended from heaven, before even Babylon, before Uruk, before Ur. The city was not merely walls, it was axis, a point where heaven met earth, and the divine could taste barley and blood. In those first days, humans did not separate the sacred from the soil. The plow was a prayer, the tablet a hymn. Even death was a covenant, one ode to the netherworld, ruled by Ereshkigal, queen of the silence beneath. What did they fear, these first ones? Not death, but forgetting. So they wrote. They carved lines into clay, lines that meant grain, that meant flood, that meant king, god, love, war. In doing so, they named the world. To name a thing was to preserve it, to hold it still for a breath before time swept it away. Language, then, was defiance, against the flood, against silence, against the gods. But even the gods admired the human need to remember, and so temples were raised, not to shelter, but to mark presence. Ziggurats clawed toward the sky, tier upon tier, earth reaching back to its maker. Atop them, priests watched the stars, listened for divine tremors, interpreted the shape of liver and flame. It was a world saturated with meaning. Every drought a punishment, every birth a message, every king a reflection of the gods' will, or their wrath. But underneath this dance of power, something stirred, a desire not just to serve, but to shape, to rule, not as proxy, but as self. That desire would bloom in stone and bronze. It would raise Uruk to glory. It would carve the Epic of Gilgamesh. It would crown Sargon of Akkad. But it would also bring betrayal, division, collapse. For now, though, the cradle holds. The gods still walk in dreams. The scribes still write their stars into clay, and the rivers still remember. The land has spoken. The gods have shaped. The humans have begun to answer, with cities, with myth, with longing. There is a sound older than speech, more sacred than song. It is the rhythm of stone against stone, the measured breath of bricklayers, the heartbeat of walls rising. In the land between rivers, where silt kissed the toes of the gods, a city grew, not with haste, but with divine intent. Her name was Uruk. And she was not merely built, she was summoned. Not the first city, perhaps, but the loudest. Uruk did not begin with war. She began with stories, with farmers who watched the flood waters swell and fall, with potters and priests, with dreamers and drunkards, and somewhere among them, a king. His name was Gilgamesh. 2/3 God, 1/3 man. A contradiction carved into the very soul of civilization. But before the epic came the walls. Uruk rose from clay and will, her outer ramparts stretching 6 miles around, vast even by modern eyes. Enclosed within were markets, gardens, palaces, and temples, chief among them the Eanna, sacred to Inanna, goddess of desire and war. There, love was law, and ecstasy a rite. Stone columns rose like reeds from the marshes, shaped not just by masons, but by myth. Uruk was not merely a city. She was a question made visible. Can the divine live in stone? The answer, tentative, trembling, was yes. For here, the sacred was daily. In the hiss of beer brewed in clay jars, in the flicker of oil lamps that danced like stars on temple walls, in the chants of priestesses who sang to the morning as though it were a lover returning from war. And above it all, the king walked. Gilgamesh, the restless one. He who built the walls, he who took what he desired. He who feared nothing except his own end. He was the city's strength and its wound, a tyrant to some, a god to others. His tale, stitched into time, does not begin in heroism, but in arrogance. Uruk trembled beneath his hand, until the gods, tired of his excess, shaped a wild man from clay, Enkidu, to humble him. And so the friendship was born. Wildness met royalty, forest met brick, silence met language. Together they slew monsters. Together they defied the heavens. Together they changed the nature of man. But it was only when Enkidu died, claimed by the gods for a sin of hubris, that Gilgamesh truly awoke. He wept, he wandered, he searched, not for conquest, but for meaning. What is the measure of a life? He asked the wind. Is there no permanence beneath these stars? In that question, the soul of Uruk was born, not in victory, but in mourning, not in conquest, but in remembrance. And when Gilgamesh returned, he looked again upon his city, the high walls, the burnt brick temples, the narrow streets alive with labor and laughter. And he saw, finally, that this too was a kind of immortality, not in escaping death, but in leaving something behind, in stone, in story, in the shape of a city that would echo through time. Uruk would pass, her walls would crack, her gods would fall silent. But the tale remained. The clay tablets buried beneath centuries of sand, waiting for hands to uncover them, for eyes to read the ancient longing written into wedge-shaped lines. Gilgamesh lives, not in blood, but in memory. And Uruk, his creation, his mirror, his monument, she lives too. For what is a city if not the soul of a people, turned outward? Before steel, before Rome, before even the pharaoh's gaze turned skyward in stone, there was Sumer, a tapestry of city-states stitched with rivers and crowned with smoke. Not a nation, but a constellation, not a kingdom, but a chorus. Each city singing its own hymn to heaven. Lagash, Ulika-Kish, Uma, Eridu, names like prayers carved into the clay of time, each ruled by a Lugal, a great man, a king, though more than ruler, less than God. He was the bridge between dirt and divinity. He tilled the soil of fate, and the gods watched, always watching. They did not sit in still heavens. They walked among their people in dreams, in plagues, in blessings of barley and war. Each city bore its own divine patron, and the pride of one town's god became the grievance of another. So the Sumerians warred, not for greed, but for favor, not for land alone, but for cosmic legitimacy. To defeat a city was to humble its god. It was a sacred violence, bloody but righteous, a theology of conquest written not in creeds, but in crushed bones and burning gates. And through this divine strife, the first known king stepped into the world stage, etched not merely in record, but in myth. There was Etana of Kish, who flew on an eagle's back to the heavens in search of a child, seeking legacy, not power. There was Lugal-Zaggisi of Umma, who, for a brief breath of time, unified Sumer's proud cities under one banner, declaring himself king of the land. But the gods are not fond of unity that challenges their own. From the north, across Akkad's dust-blown plains, a storm began to stir. Sargon. The name would become thunder in the mouths of kings for centuries to come. He was not born in a palace, but in silence. A cupbearer, a servant, a foundling cast upon a river like Moses or like myth, raised among gardeners, taught to listen to soil, taught humility, but the stars wrote a different fate across his brow. When he rose like flame across parchment, with cunning, with vision, with blood. He crushed Lugal-Zaggisi, bound him in chains, paraded him through the gate of Enlil as a living offering, and so ended the brief union of Sumer and began the first empire, the Akkadian Empire, a name that hummed with new breath, a fusion of language, of gods, of law and lore. Sargon would rule not merely as king, but as shadow of the divine. He took not one city, but all of them. He commanded loyalty across deserts and deltas, from the Zagros Mountains to the edge of the Levant. He did not destroy Sumer. He absorbed it. Akkadian became the new tongue, yet Sumerian was not silenced. It became sacred, the language of gods, of temples, of memory. Here, in this fusion, the pattern was laid. Empires rise not only by sword, but by synthesis, by taking what came before and giving it new skin. But such glory is not weightless. The burden of empire is the fear of its own echo. Sargon feared rebellion like a ghost beneath his throne. He built a standing army unheard of in the world before. He ruled with iron decree, not priestly dreams. And though his reign was long, the storms brewed in the wings. His grandsons would falter, his cities would rebel, and the Akkadian tongue, though beautiful and sharp as obsidian, would one day fall silent. But in Sargon, the world saw what was possible, that a man, born of nothing, could gather the stars into a crown, that unity could be forged by will alone, that the gods, once voices in the marsh, now whispered in palaces and policy. In him, a new archetype was born, the conquering king. Neither shepherd nor priest, but vision incarnate. It is he who stands behind the Caesars, behind the Alexanders, behind the iron-limbed kings of every age. And in the ruins of Akkad, long since drowned in dust, his name still lingers. Not on the lips of the living, but in the silence of stone, the silence that remembers. The Akkadian Empire, once flame on the horizon, began to flicker. Its cities, so tightly bound beneath Sargon's shadow, began to shift like clay after rain, cracking, softening, breaking under their own weight. What does it mean when the center no longer holds? To the Akkadians, it meant more than rebellion or famine. It meant the gods were angry. The sky darkened, not with metaphor, but with storm. A strange wind swept across the land. The rivers withdrew their blessings. The soil, once obedient, turned to stone. For decades, drought strangled the heart of Mesopotamia. Crops failed, fields yellowed. Cities fell silent under the weight of hunger. From the north came whispers, the Gutians, mountain people, wanderers with no king, no gods, no temples. The Akkadians called them barbarians, but the truth was simpler. They were the omen, not the cause. When they descended from the Zagros heights, they did not come like conquerors. They came like vultures, picking through what had already begun to rot. The great cities, Agade, Nippur, Akkad itself, trembled. Walls once thought invincible were breached. Statues of gods were dragged through blood-muddied streets, the scribes watching from rooftops with clay and stylus in hand, recorded it not as history, but as divine punishment. The storm was hurled from the sky by the gods, wrote one trembling hand in fading Sumerian. The people wept, the temples were silent, the king prayed, but no answer came. And so the empire fell, not in battle alone, but in meaning. When the gods fall silent, when temples become tombs, when kings no longer dream, then a people do not simply die. They forget who they are. This was not just a collapse. It was an unraveling. The Akkadian tongue began to fade from the schools. The royal line was broken. The myths became scattered, fragmented, no longer sung in unison. But even in collapse, something sacred remained. The people did not vanish. The stories did not die. They buried the old statues. They lit lamps in broken shrines. And in the dark corners of half-ruined ziggurats, they whispered the names of their ancestors. Not to preserve glory, but to preserve memory. It is said that in the ruins of Akkad, a lone scribe scratched a final lament into clay. I have seen kings made dust. I have seen cities turned to shadow, but I remember the song of my father and the gods who once drank beside the fire. Even in the end, there is a beginning. For in the ashes of Akkad, the old cities of Sumer stirred once more. They remembered the older hymns, the older gods, their language, their rhythm. The Gutian kings, foreign and nameless, ruled in confusion. They could not read the stars. They did not know the rites. And in that vacuum, the ancient spirit returned, not in thunder, but in ink. From the south, a city that had waited in silence began to rise again. Ulika, the city of moonlight and law. A city patient as the tide. She would lift her head, rebuild her temples, and become a beacon. But that is the tale yet to come. For now, we remain in the dust, among broken idols and cracked tablets, among children born with no memory of empire, and old men who still speak the name Sargon like a lost psalm. The gods have turned their faces, but the clay remains, and clay remembers. It began not with war drums, but with silence, a pause in the chaos, stillness in the fields. After the dust storms and divine punishments, after the wild kings with no names had passed like smoke, rose. Not in pride, but in remembrance. She had always been there, beside the slow bend of the Euphrates. Her ziggurat, weathered and worn, still kissed the sky. Her people still knew the stars, still sang to Nana, the moon god, who watched over them like a patient father. When others forgot the old ways, endured, not through force, but through faith. Now the time had come to rise again. The Gutians had withered, unable to hold the cities they had conquered. Their rule was thin, like breath on glass. The gods had not spoken to them. The land did not favor them. They vanished back into the hills, leaving behind a fractured land and a people hungry for order. And from this hunger, a king emerged. Ur-Nammu, not a tyrant, not a conqueror, but a builder of law. He did not march with fire and sword. He rebuilt the walls. He reopened the temples. He called the priests to return. He measured the land, stone by stone, law by law, until chaos bent itself into a path once more. The third dynasty of Ur had begun. It was no mere return to the old ways. It was a transfiguration. Ur-Nammu declared himself king of Sumer and Akkad, bridging the fallen empire and the first cities, weaving together the shattered memory of a civilization. And what he offered was not only power, but justice. His name would live not just in song, but in law code, one of the oldest the world has ever known. Inscribed in Sumerian, it laid down the weight of wrongs and the price of peace. Where Sargon conquered the world, Ur-Nammu sought to make it livable. If a man commits murder, he shall be killed. If he breaks another man's bone, he shall pay a fine of silver. If he steals, he shall return twice its worth. It was not mercy, but it was order. And in order, the people found comfort. Blossomed. Fields bloomed again beneath irrigation guided by lunar priests and surveyors. Grain filled the storehouses. Artisans carved statues of kings seated beneath the crescent of Nana. Women held positions of power within temple and court. The ziggurat of rose higher, level by level, until its brick summit seemed to cradle the moon itself. This was the age of Shulgi, son of Nammu, poet, priest, warrior, king. He declared himself divine, not metaphorically, but truly, not as a boast, but as a necessity. For how else could one stand between gods and men? Shulgi ran from Nippur to in a single day, or so the tablets claim. He composed hymns in his own name. He inspected the temples himself. He reorganized the bureaucracy like a sculptor shaping marble. And for a time, the land prospered, but prosperity brings with it shadow. The outer provinces, Elam to the east, the Amorites in the west, watched with uneasy silence. Trade caravans flowed, but so too did envy. Borders hardened. Rebellions simmered beneath the surface. And beneath every monument, time continued its slow erosion. Even gods once praised fall silent when their names are spoken without awe. Yet in this moment, stood at her highest. She was the city of cities. Her ziggurat towered like a mountain of intention. Her scribes recorded not just tribute and grain, but literature, hymns, mathematics, and philosophy. She mapped the heavens. She reasoned with stars. In the ancient Sumerian soul burned its last, brightest flame. But all fire feeds on fuel, and fuel eventually runs out. For now, the moon is high, the king is wise, the land is rich. But beneath the rhythm of law and temple, the winds begin to stir. Is beautiful, and beauty always draws the eye of fate. Listen. There is a silence that arrives before the fall. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of tension, of watchers on distant hills, of rumors whispered in caravan camps, of doors bolted a little earlier each night. Stood radiant beneath the gaze of the moon. Her ziggurat rose like a ladder to the divine. Her kings, once mortal, now carved their names beside the gods. And yet, outside the city gates, the horizon darkened. It did not begin with war. It began with movement. Strangers drifted across the western deserts. Amorites, they were called. Amuru, in the old tongue. Nomads from the fringes, from the edge of maps and memory. To some, they were little more than dust-cloaked wanderers, tenders of sheep and cattle. But to others, they were a rising tide, moving slowly, patiently, inevitable. The scribes of watched them with disdain at first. "These are not people of law," they wrote. "They build no temples, follow no rites." But the Amorites were many, and the Amorites were hungry. They settled in pockets, first at the margins, on riverbanks, near abandoned outposts, forgotten fields. They traded, they intermarried, and, as with all tides, they rose. While perfected its tablets and hymns, its royal decrees and grain quotas, the world around it shifted. In the east, the old enemy stirred, Elam, ancient and proud, its kings watching the west with sharpened intent. In the highlands, restless tribes murmured. In the very provinces of the empire, governors grew bold, autonomy swelling in the absence of fear. And the divine silence began. The moon, once luminous, seemed dimmer. The harvests, once promised by law and prayer, faltered. The gods, those ever listening, ever judging voices of storm and sun, began to look away. Then came the fall. It was not sudden, it was cruelly slow. A rebellion in the south, an Elamite incursion from the east, a governor's betrayal, a shipment of grain that never arrived, an omen seen in the liver of a lamb. One by one, the signs fell into place like bones in a tomb, and when the Elamite armies came, they did not come as raiders, they came as the judgment of heaven. Steel met brick, flame kissed parchment, and the city of Ur, the city of Nana, fell. Ur-Nammu's law codes turned to Ash-Shulgi's temples crumbled. The moon god's ziggurat was desecrated. The last king of Ur, Ibisin, was dragged in chains into the east, his cries lost in the wind. A lament was written, one of the oldest songs of mourning the world has ever known. Ur is a city grown silent, its gates are torn from their hinges, the river no longer speaks, the god has abandoned his house. So ends the third dynasty of Ur. But in this ending, something ancient survived. The Amorites, once outsiders, now became heirs. They would not destroy Sumer, they would inhabit it, take its language, its gods, its stories, and make them their own. They would found new cities, one of them in time called Babylon. But that is the whisper of a later dream. For now, we stand among the ruins of Ur, where the moonlight falls on empty streets, where tablets lie cracked beneath the dust, where no incense rises. The city is gone, but the questions remain. What is permanence? What is a king's name if the wind cannot speak it? What is civilization if it cannot hold off the dark? And yet, even in silence, there is memory. Even in ash, the clay remembers. From the ruins of Sumer, a new voice began to stir. Not in thunder, but in the murmur of irrigation channels, in the tread of sandals over dusty roads, in the whispers between traders, priests, and soldiers. Babylon. Once a minor outpost, a footnote beside greater cities, a flickering torch in the long night after Ur. Now it began to rise, not with the arrogance of empire, but with the slow gravity of destiny. It stood beside the Euphrates like a poised question. What if order could return? What if the gods had not left, but merely waited for a new voice to speak their laws into the clay? The voice was Hammurabi. He came not as a conqueror at first, but as a shepherd of laws, of hearts, of scattered peoples. His Babylon was still young, her walls not yet carved with prophecy. But he had vision, and that is a rarer gift than conquest. He knew that swords make kings, but only justice makes memory. So he set about gathering the fragments of Sumer and Akkad, the fractured cities, the wandering Amorite tribes, the fading gods who no longer heard hymns in their own tongues. He wrote no poems of himself, but his words would echo through the ages. Chiseled into a single black stone, rising like a finger toward the heavens, to cause justice to prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, so that the strong may not oppress the weak. The Code of Hammurabi. Not a dream, but a system, harsh, measured, absolute. If a builder's house collapsed, he paid with his life. If a man destroyed another's eye, his own was taken. If a slave denied his master, his ear was cut. But within the hardness, a seed of structure was sown. Hammurabi's laws were not about kindness, they were about order. They were a wall against chaos, and in this wall, Babylon grew. The fields were planted, the canals were dredged, temples rose again. Scribes copied texts long thought lost, songs from Ur, prayers from Eridu, proverbs from Nippur. Hammurabi took the gods of his enemies and placed them beside his own. He did not erase history. He absorbed it, and above all, he raised high the name of Marduk. Once a lesser god of storms, now made supreme, Lord of judgment, patron of Babylon. Marduk measured the heavens, Marduk judged the destinies. Marduk chose Hammurabi. In this divine partnership, king and god became mirror and flame. And so Babylon was born, not only of bricks and kings, but of myth, law, memory, and unshaken purpose. But beneath the glory, time continued its whispering. The people obeyed, but some obeyed in silence. The gods were served, but not all gods equally. The borders held, but they were never still. Still, for a time, the dream held. Babylon became more than a city. She became an idea. That law could govern chaos. That even in a world carved by flood and fire, meaning could endure. When Hammurabi died, he left behind not a son of equal weight, but a city ready to become immortal. Its towers had not yet touched the sky. Its exiles had not yet wept by distant rivers. Its gardens had not yet hung in myth, but the heart of Babylon had begun to beat. And in that heartbeat, we feel again the pulse of Sumer, the whisper of Akkad, the dream of Ur. The past is never gone. It waits beneath the dust. It rises in lore, in memory, in name chiseled deep, black stone against sun. Before the stars were numbered, before men drew lines across rivers and crowned themselves with clay, there was chaos. The primal sea, shapeless and eternal. From this chaos, the Babylonians told us, came the gods, and from the gods, conflict. The myth was not just story, it was foundation. It told them why the sky moved, why the wind wept, why kings must rule, why cities must rise and fall. At the center of this myth, as Babylon itself rose into history, stood a god who had once been small. Marduk. Not born of the old pantheon, not first among the divine, but clever, patient, chosen. The story is sung in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation, epic, chanted in temples during the New Year festival, when time was unmade and remade each spring. It begins with Apsu and Tiamat, the salt and sweet waters, primordial beings from whose mingling came the gods. But the young gods were noisy, unruly, prideful. Apsu sought to destroy them. Tiamat, his consort, at first resisted, then, enraged by his death, created monsters of chaos. Dragons, serpents, scorpion men, hissing with divine wrath. She crowned Kingu, her new lover, with the tablets of destiny, and the gods were thrown into terror. Who would stand against her? Then came Marduk, son of Ea, child of the clever deep. He stepped forward, not boastful, but resolute. "If I defeat her," he said, "let me be king of the gods. Let my words shape the world." And so it was agreed. Marduk took his net, fashioned winds into Sata, weapons, rode the storm chariot, drawn by fearsome beasts. He faced Tiamat, the dragon of the abyss. She opened her jaws to devour him. Marduk sent a storm into her mouth, stretched her open, pierced her heart with his spear. She fell, broken, and from her body he shaped the universe. Her ribs became the sky, her tail the Milky Way, her weeping eyes the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, her belly the dome of the heavens. Then Marduk took the tablets of destiny from Kingu and crushed him. From Kingu's blood and clay he shaped mankind, to serve the gods, to bear their burdens, to maintain the order Marduk had forged. This was no idle myth. It was the blueprint of Babylonian reality. It justified rule. It ordered the heavens. It gave meaning to suffering. Marduk's triumph became Babylon's triumph. Each year, during the Akitu festival, the priests reenacted creation. The king would be humbled, struck, stripped of power. Only when he acknowledged Marduk's supremacy could kingship be restored. Even Hammurabi, the lawgiver, was servant to this myth. His laws did not flow from himself, but from Marduk's divine order. In the myth, humans are born not as lords, but as laborers of the cosmos. And yet they are also part of the divine story, woven into the skin of Tiamat, shaped from the blood of rebellion. In this paradox, the Babylonians found meaning. Their world was not chaotic. It had been tamed, violently, beautifully, by a god who used wisdom and will. Their city, too, reflected this divine design. Its walls traced the stars, its temples aligned with solstice and equinox. Its ziggurats climbed heavenward, imitating Marduk's victory over the void. Thus, Babylon was not merely a place. It was a cosmic center, a reflection of the universe itself, where law, myth, and architecture formed a sacred triangle. And in the night, as priests whispered to the stars and farmers laid their hands upon the soil, they knew their place in the great design, born of blood and dust, yet standing in the shadow of a god who once slew the sea and named the world into being. There is a dream that men have always carried, folded deep in the marrow of their ambition, to build something so vast, so eternal, that even the heavens must bow. In Babylon, that dream took the shape of a tower. It rose from the dust like a challenge, not of wood, but of fired brick, each brick pressed with the name of a king, each stone laid with sweat and invocation, its name in the ancient tongue, Etemenanki, house of the foundation of heaven and earth. To its builders, it was not arrogance, it was devotion, a ladder not only to the gods, but to meaning itself. To later voices, it became Babel, a warning, a reckoning, a tale murmured at the edge of scripture and memory. And they said, "Come, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name lest we be scattered upon the face of the earth." But the divine does not yield to pride. Not then, not now. The myth says that God looked down, not with fear, but with sorrow, with the weary patience of eternity. And so he scattered their tongues. What once was one became many, 1,000 dialects, 1,000 hungers, 1,000 roads now forked and forked again. What had been unity became confusion. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. But the myth is not merely punishment, it is truth woven into parable. For what is history but the long echo of broken speech? Empires rise and fall, nations build and are divided, humans gather and are scattered. The Tower of Babel was not only bricks, it was memory, it was myth, it was the human need to reach and the divine reminder that reaching alone is not enough. In the ruins of Etemenanki, we see not failure, but reflection. For even if the tongue split, even if the winds blew the mortar to sand, the tower left its shadow in every age. The pyramids of Giza, the cathedrals of Europe, the minarets of Damascus, the rockets that claw the sky. Each is a Babel, each whispers upward, and still we speak in fragments. Still we try to name the stars. Babylon understood this. She did not stop building, even when gods fell silent, even when towers cracked. Her priests kept records, her scribes kept names. Her poets, even in exile, remembered her as the mother of cities. What collapsed in brick endured in symbol. The tower may have fallen, but the dream remains, that through language, through creation, we might yet climb again. Not to seize the heavens, but to understand them, to find in the scattered speech of mankind a song again unified, not by pride, but by longing. Beneath the burning sun of Mesopotamia, where the Euphrates curves like a forgotten memory, a silence begins to settle on Babylon. It is not the silence of peace, but of waiting, of winds brushing abandoned fields, of torches glimmering along ramparts, of a people who know in their bones that something once eternal has begun to crack. The great ziggurat still stands, its bricks kissed with the names of kings. The temples still burn incense. The scribes still copy laws onto clay, but the gods have grown distant. Babylon, queen of cities, has drawn too much gaze, too much envy, and from the north another power stirs. Assyria. Hard men from the upper Tigris, their hearts forged in war, their cities cast in iron. They do not build for beauty, they build for conquest. Esher watches with one eye open. His kings, Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, Sennacherib, march like storms, leaving behind broken walls and rivers of fire. They see Babylon not as sister, but as rival, not as sacred, but as prize. And so it begins. A century of siege, rebellion, revenge. The Empire of Babylon, proud, weary, and fractured, struggles to hold the gods upright. One king bows, the next rebels. Another signs treaties, only to break them in, midnight whispers. And the Assyrians come again. They come with siege towers and battering rams. They come with prisoners on hooks, with scribes to count the corpses. They come with gods of their own, Asher, Ninurta. And they do not bow to Marduk. The city falls, then rises, then falls again, each time a little less whole, each time a little more memory than presence, and yet the soul of Babylon does not break. It remembers, even as her temples are looted, her nobles led away in chains, her gates thrown open to foreign tongues. Still she remembers. A song survives, a tablet hidden beneath stone, a lament written in the dust of a ruined altar. O Babylon, how long will you suffer? Your gods are led away like captives, your children cry in foreign tongues, and the river runs red with remembrance. This is exile not yet written in scripture, but it foreshadows the weeping by distant waters. Still, amid betrayal and war, a flicker remains. In the hearts of merchants, in the hands of scribes, in the eyes of priests who carry the ashes of sacred fire to new cities, new shrines, new generations. Babylon bleeds, but Babylon does not vanish. She becomes memory in motion, a sacred idea moving through exile. Out of ruin, as always in the long rhythm of history, there comes a flame, flickering at first, but rising with the breath of kings and dreams. From the line of Nabopolassar, a warrior who cast off the Assyrian yoke, came a son whose name would thunder across desert and scripture alike. Nebuchadnezzar II. To some, a tyrant of iron and fire. To others, the last great sovereign of Babylon, the restorer of its golden crown. But names are mirrors, and in his, both flame and shadow were written. He rose not merely to conquer, but to remember. He had walked the burned-out quarters of the old city, seen the scorched ziggurat, heard the wind whistling through the ribs of ruined gates. He did not mourn. He rebuilt. With his name pressed into brick and basalt, he raised the city again, not as it had been, but as it must be. The Ishtar Gate, clad in blue-glazed tiles. Lions, bulls, and dragons striding across it like living gods. The processional way, stretching wide and bright, where offerings passed and kings paraded. The temples, like Ekur and Esagila, awakened once more to the sound of sacred hymns. The ziggurat, perhaps the one once called Babel, was raised again to kiss the horizon, not out of pride, but devotion. In Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, beauty was commanded. Gardens were set to hang in the sky. Tiers of palm and pomegranate, suspended by stone and water, a gift to his queen, who longed for the hills of her native Media. Whether myth or memory, the hanging gardens endured in the minds of men long after the garden was lost. But glory is never alone. It walks hand in hand with war. In the west, a stubborn kingdom defied him, Judah. Its kings rebelled, its prophets warned, its God whispered warnings Nebuchadnezzar did not hear. So he marched, once and then again. The walls of Jerusalem cracked beneath his siege. The temple was plundered, its sacred vessels taken, its priests scattered. The people were chained, driven eastward toward the Tigris, toward the shadow of the ziggurat, toward the river where they would sit and weep. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. The exile had begun. To Babylon, it was another conquest, another page in the scroll of empire. To the exiled, it was a crucible of identity. In the heart of their sorrow, something ancient became eternal. Faith refined by fire, memory sanctified in foreign soil. Nebuchadnezzar had brought ruin to Jerusalem, but unwittingly, He helped birth a people of the book. He saw only walls and thrones, but he had stirred something deeper, a legacy he could not contain. Near the end of his life, madness overtook him. The scribes say he wandered the fields, eating grass like an animal, until his reason returned, and he lifted his eyes to heaven. Was it judgment or transformation? Even kings must bow, eventually, before the eternal. When Nebuchadnezzar died, Babylon still shone, but shadows gathered at the edge of her brilliance. The fire he had kindled would not last forever. Even the brightest torch burns its own wick, and yet, in those brief years, Babylon burned with a light that even time has not entirely dimmed. A final flare, a last flame of grandeur before the slow descent into twilight. In the final hour of an empire, there is often laughter, and wine, and a feast too loud to hear the footsteps of fate. The story begins in a banquet hall. Gold glimmering, torches flickering against painted lions. Laughter blooming from lips unaware of their own funeral hymn. Belshazzar, Prince Regent of Babylon, sat among his lords, goblet in hand, unaware that the river outside whispered of betrayal. The true king, Nabonidus, a mystic lost in desert shrines, had long since abandoned the city's throne, and so Belshazzar ruled in name, crowned in borrowed light, clutching what remained of Nebuchadnezzar's fire. But the world was changing. To the east, the Persians stirred. Led by a man of strategy and silence, Cyrus the Great moved with the calm of inevitability. He did not shout, he did not boast. He simply advanced, and cities opened their gates like flowers turning to the sun. Yet here in Babylon, Belshazzar feasted, in defiance or in denial. He summoned the sacred vessels, plundered from Jerusalem decades before, and filled them with wine. "Drink," he cried. "Let us praise our gods of gold and stone." But the walls had begun to breathe, and history had come to collect its due. Then, in silence deeper than thunder, a hand appeared. Not of man, not of God, but something in between. A finger of light etched words into the stone. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The room hushed. Laughter died in throats. The wine turned bitter. No one could read it. None dared interpret, until the queen spoke of a man forgotten. Daniel, old now, but wise. He entered as if from a different world, clothed in quiet authority. He did not flatter. He did not fear. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. A curse, but not from anger. Rather, from history itself, which watches kings rise like morning fires and fall like autumn leaves. That night, as the banquet slowed, Cyrus's army entered the city, not with swords, but with silence. The Euphrates had been diverted. The waters withdrew like breath from a dying lung. And under Babylon's gates, the Persians flowed like dusk itself. No battle, no fire, just the quiet death of a kingdom that had once defied the stars. Belshazzar was slain, and with him, Babylon's sovereignty. Not its stones, not its myths, but its soul as the beating heart of an empire. The dream ended not with ruin, but with stillness. The last torch extinguished by a breeze no one saw coming. The city remained. Its walls stood tall, but something had passed from the world, a chapter closed with letters scrawled in firelight across a banquet wall. And the echo of that writing has never left us. It did not fall with fire. There were no shattered gates, no screams curling into the blackened sky. Instead, Babylon, proud mother of empires, was taken in silence. The night the river withdrew, as if obeying some divine whisper, an army walked beneath her walls. No blood, no conquest cry, only the quiet breath of change. Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, did not enter Babylon like a conqueror. He entered as if answering a summons long sent from the mouth of history. The priests, wearied by mad kings and false piety, welcomed him. The scribes etched his name into clay, not as destroyer, but liberator. For Babylon had not merely fallen, it had exhaled. And in that breath, something ancient had slipped away. Cyrus stood not atop rubble, but among temples still standing. He did not raise the ziggurats. He bowed to Marduk, not as a believer, but as a ruler who understood symbols. Power, he knew, lives in continuity, not erasure. "I returned the gods to their temples," the Cyrus cylinder proclaims, "and I restored the people to their homes." In these words lies a paradox, that Babylon's fall brought freedom to those it had once taken captive. The exiled Jews, weeping by her rivers, now heard a new decree. "Go home," Cyrus said. "Rebuild your temple, worship your God in your own tongue." And so the echoes of Babylon drifted westward again, carried by priests and prophets, pressed into scrolls that would one day form the spine of a new covenant. Cyrus ruled with tolerance, but not affection. He wore Babylon like a royal robe, respected, admired, but not truly his. For the Persians spoke a different rhythm. They wrote not in cuneiform, but in old Aryan tongues. They knelt not to Enlil or Ishtar, but to Ahura Mazda, a god of light and cosmic order. And so, gradually, the soul of Babylon dimmed. Her language slipped into the mouth of merchants. Her gods were honored, but no longer feared. Her temples remained, but the priests grew old with no disciples to replace their chants. And yet, Babylon did not rebel. She had played her part in the great story. Now she stood still, like a once great actor watching a younger cast take the stage. The veil of Persia lay soft upon her shoulders. It did not crush her, but it silenced her voice. A hush fell over the city, not of death, but of transition. Where once had stood a thunderous empire, now remained a memory draped in marble. And in that memory, new seeds were sown, a reverence for law, a legacy of order, a whisper that even when kingdoms fade, their shadows lengthen into the future. The stars had begun to shift, not in the sky, but in the soul. Under Persian rule, Babylon's temples still stood, but their fires grew dim, not extinguished, only overshadowed by a new flame. In the east, in the highlands of Iran, a prophet once walked alone among sacred mountains. His name was Zarathustra, or to the Greeks, Zoroaster. Long before Cyrus, long before Darius, he had seen a war not of kings, but of cosmic principles. Light and dark, truth and lie. And from his revelation rose a fire worshipped not as a god, but as a symbol of divine clarity, not chaotic like the storm gods of old, but orderly, measured, just. Now, under the reign of Darius I, this vision ascended the throne. A king of vision and violence, Darius carved an empire in marble and fire. From the sands of Egypt to the snows of the Hindu Kush, and upon Babylon he laid a strange silence, respectful, bureaucratic, absolute. He did not destroy her gods. He simply outshone them. In Persepolis, great halls rose. In Behistun, his victories were carved high above the valley floor, a message to gods and mortals alike. And in that message, the old gods of Mesopotamia faded. For Darius brought not only armies, but a world view, a vision of cosmic law, of one god above all others. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord who watched from beyond the stars. Beneath this sun-bright order, Babylon seemed strangely quiet. The scribes still copied laws. The merchants still bartered beneath the gates. But something trembled beneath the calm. Not rebellion, but remembrance. For Babylon was not only a place, she was a way of seeing, a world where gods warred in the heavens and humans played their echoes on the earth. Now that world was eclipsed. The Persians lit sacred fires in mountain temples, but the ziggurats stood like forgotten stairways to heavens no longer watched. Even time began to shift. The Babylonians had once measured time by the stars, by the meticulous movement of Venus, by omens etched into clay. Now time belonged to empire, to edicts, scrolls, and royal calendars from Persepolis and Susa. The ancient rhythm of myth was replaced by the ticking of order, and yet, deep within the silence, Babylon remembered. Like embers beneath ash, she kept the shape of old stories, of Marduk and Tiamat, of Enkidu and Gilgamesh, of a garden by two rivers and a flood that had once washed the world clean. These stories did not vanish. They migrated into Hebrew scrolls, Greek epics, and whispered mythologies that stretched far beyond the Tigris and Euphrates. Even as Persia rose, Babylon's gods did not die. They changed names. They donned new robes. They passed from temple to tale. And so the fire that consumed her was not entirely destruction. It was transfiguration. The gods became memory. The temples became symbols. The city became legend. And Darius, for all his marble and lore, could not halt the quiet turning of the human soul toward story. For power may reign, but meaning endures. The sun rose high over the ancient city, casting long shadows across worn stone and broken dreams. Babylon, once the throne of gods and kings, stood now as a silent witness to the relentless march of history's tide. Into this twilight strode a man with fire in his eyes, a son of Macedonia, a dreamer of empires, Alexander. He came not with whispers, but with thunder. His armies, vast and hungry, carved a path through lands where gods were once woven into every breath. They spoke of him as a god, a son of Zeus. But in truth, he was a shadow of a shadow, an echo of empire's insatiable hunger. Babylon opened her gates, not with swords drawn, but with a weary acceptance. The city, heavy with history, welcomed the conqueror's steps. But the weight was no longer pride, it was fatigue. Alexander walked among the ruins of temples, his gaze caught between reverence and ambition. He dreamed of a new world, where east and west would blend like rivers meeting the sea. Yet even as he celebrated his triumph, there was a quiet unraveling beneath the surface. The palace halls whispered of old ghosts. The statues seemed to watch silently, and the gods themselves withdrew behind veils of silence. Alexander's conquest was swift, but it was a descent into a world that had lost its center, where ancient meanings fractured like broken pottery. He fell ill in the city he had claimed, his breath growing shallow, his visions filled with omens no mortal could decipher. As he lay between worlds, the empire he forged began to splinter. Generals carved their own kingdoms, and Babylon, once the heart, became a forgotten jewel in a crown of many. The gods, it seemed, had retreated. No longer did the rivers sing with their presence, no longer did the stars chart their favor. Babylon was drifting, a ship without a captain, adrift on the sea of time, and so began the long descent, not of walls or armies, but of memory itself. The city that had birthed civilization now faced a quiet fading, its stories slipping into shadow. Yet, even in decline, Babylon held a secret truth: that all great journeys, even those of fire and conquest, must eventually bow to the slow, sacred rhythm of loss. In the fading light of empire, Babylon became a city of ghosts, not only of kings and gods, but of stories once spoken aloud, now whispered in silence. She was a vast underworld, a labyrinth of memory where shadows lingered among crumbled bricks and echoes carried the weight of centuries. The great ziggurats, once stairways to heaven, stood like tombstones beneath a waning sky. Their stones whispered of a time when gods and men had danced together, when the cosmos breathed through the mouths of priests. But now, the voices had grown faint. New peoples claimed the lands, new tongues wove fresh songs. The proud city was no longer the heart, but a relic, a seedbed for distant dreams. Among these new voices, there rose the murmurs of the Hebrews, a people shaped by exile and longing, by the pain of loss and the fierce hope of return. Their prophets carried the flame of Babylon's old mysteries, transforming flood and exile into sacred narrative. In their texts, the ancient gods wore new faces. The chaotic waters of Tiamat became the swirling sea of sin. The ziggurats echoed in dreams of towers that reached too high, and the flood that cleansed the earth became a covenant etched in tears and promises. The Babylonian myths did not perish. They were reborn in new flesh, woven into the sacred stories that shaped entire peoples. And so, Babylon's spirit lived on, not in stone, but in the heart of memory. But memory is a realm both fragile and fierce. It is the underworld where truth is tested, where loss becomes revelation. As empires shifted like sand, Babylon became a place of reflection, a mirror held up to the human soul. What remains when all is lost? What meaning endures beyond the fall of kings? Here, in the silence of fading temples, these questions gathered like mist. The city became a sacred tomb and a seedbed for new beginnings, a place where the past was both prison and promise. And in that twilight, the old world met the new, not with violence, but with the slow alchemy of remembrance. The gods slept, but their dreams breathed beneath the dust, waiting for the moment when stories would awaken once more. From the ashes of fallen empires, from the depths where memory dwells, there rises a quiet illumination, a whisper of wisdom that endures beyond ruin. Babylon was not merely stone and dust. It was a cradle of thought, a forge where human consciousness first took shape, where the very questions of existence were carved like stars upon the night. In the quiet aftermath, her legacy whispered through ancient scrolls and epic tales. The Epic of Gilgamesh, old as the rivers themselves, survived the passage of time like a flame kept alive in shadow. It told of a king who sought the secret of immortality, not in conquest or glory, but in the understanding of loss, friendship, and mortality. This was the oldest meditation on the human condition, a mirror held before every soul that wonders. What does it mean to live? What does it mean to die? From these ancient words grew a tradition, an unbroken thread linking civilizations, the search for meaning in the face of oblivion. Babylonian scribes taught the art of writing, not merely as record, but as a sacred act, a means to bind time itself, to wrest eternity from the fleeting breath of now. They measured the heavens, counted the stars, charted the cycles of the moon and sun, not only to predict, but to glimpse the divine geometry that shapes all things. Through their mathematics and law codes, they etched a vision of order, a hope that justice could be codified, that society might rise above chaos. And so their wisdom seeped into the veins of later thought, into the scrolls of the Hebrews, into the dialogues of the Greeks, and beyond. Philosophers would ponder the same eternal riddles, their voices echoing the silent chants of Mesopotamian priests, of fate and free will, of the gods' will and human choice. The poets and sages of ages to come would drink deeply from the well of Babylon's ancient stories, their own myths forever entwined with the sacred rivers of Mesopotamia. Thus, the empire that once fell beneath the heel of Cyrus, that once bowed to the shadow of Alexander, was reborn not in stone or sword, but in the breath of ideas and stories. The legacy of Babylon is a testament that even when empires crumble, even when gods fall silent, the search for meaning persists. The fire of wisdom, once ignited, cannot be fully extinguished. It passes from hand to hand, from age to age, a sacred torch in the long night of human history. Like a phoenix rising from its own ashes, the myths of ancient Mesopotamia soared far beyond the banks of the Euphrates. carried upon the breath of traders, scribes, and wandering people. They traveled like rivers, winding through time and space, shaping the very fabric of human storytelling. The tale of the Great Flood, once whispered by Babylonian priests beneath shadowed ziggurats, found new life in the scrolls of distant lands. Morphed and refracted through Hebrew scripture, echoed in the legends of India and Greece, etched into the collective memory of mankind. This was no mere borrowing. It was a transformation. Each culture made these ancient stories their own, infusing them with fresh meaning, new gods, new hopes. The hero Gilgamesh, half man, half divine, wandered through the gardens of myth, becoming a mirror for every culture's own quest for immortality, for wisdom beyond the limits of flesh and time. The cosmic battle of Tiamat, chaos and order, locked in eternal struggle, resonated as the eternal dance of light and shadow within every soul that seeks meaning amid disorder. In this way, Mesopotamian myth became more than history. It became the pulse of civilization, a shared language of symbols and dreams. The stories shaped laws, inspired art, and breathed life into sacred rituals. They formed the blueprint for epics to come: Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Virgil's Aeneid, and even the dreams woven by Dante centuries later. These myths, once spoken in the tongues of Akkadians and Sumerians, grew wings and traveled far, touching hearts and minds who never saw the Tigris or Euphrates. And so, the phoenix soared. Not a relic of a dead past, but a living force, a sacred flame passed through generations. Through their transformation, these myths revealed a profound truth, that the stories of a people are never truly lost. They are reborn, reshaped by every telling, and carried forward in the shared pulse of humanity. The ancient gods sleep, but their dreams live on. In every tale told beneath the stars, in every question whispered into the night. The Tigris and Euphrates flow still, silent witnesses to the endless passage of days and centuries, their waters weaving through the land like veins of memory itself. They carry within their currents the dust of empires, the whispers of gods, and the dreams of countless generations. To stand upon their banks is to feel the heartbeat of time, a pulse that stretches beyond the fleeting lives of kings and conquerors. Babylon may be dust, her temples crumbled, her kings forgotten, but the rivers endure, carrying her story onward, folded into the greater river of human history. Legacy is like these rivers, not fixed in stone or monument, but alive, flowing, transforming. What endures is not power or gold, but the stories we carry, the meanings we forge in the face of loss. As night falls over these ancient lands, one hears the soft murmurs of the past, a sacred chorus that speaks of mortality, of renewal, and of the eternal dance between destruction and creation. Civilizations rise like dawns, only to fade like twilight, yet in their fading, they become the soil for new life, new stories, new dreams. The ancient voices of Mesopotamia invite us to listen, to the silence between the stars, to the sacred spaces within ourselves. They remind us that history is not merely what has been, but a living dialogue with what might yet come. And so, as the rivers flow, so too does meaning, carried forward, etched softly into the fabric of time, waiting for new ears to hear, new hearts to remember. In this sacred flow, we find a truth as old as the earth itself, that all things pass, but all things return, transformed. And in the quiet turning of the eternal rivers, we glimpse the face of eternity. The sky, once a tapestry of divine decree, darkened as shadows gathered over Babylon's ancient walls. Not the gentle dusk of twilight, but a heavy, foreboding cloak, heralding an end. For all the grandeur etched in stone and song, all the wisdom whispered by scribes and priests, no fortress can hold against the tide of destiny forever. the mighty city, cradle of empires, stood vulnerable before the coming storm. In the year when the sun reached its zenith in an unfamiliar sky, the armies of a new king appeared beyond the horizon. Cyrus of Persia, the shepherd of a vast and rising empire, his banners unfurled like a quiet storm, not merely to conquer, but to transform. Babylon's fall was not a crash of gods, but a solemn passing, the closing of one great chapter and the uncertain opening of another. The city's gates were opened without bloodshed, a surrender whispered in the name of mercy, but beneath this seeming peace, the hearts of Babylon's people trembled. Their city, their gods, their way of life, all seemed poised to dissolve into shadow. Yet even in this fall, there was a strange grace. Cyrus, the liberator to some, did not destroy Babylon's legacy. He honored it, even embraced it, decreeing the return of exiled peoples, restoring temples, and speaking of respect. This act, both political and profound, marked a new era, where empire and culture intertwined, where old gods and new kings found uneasy peace. Still, the gathering shadows were undeniable. The era of Mesopotamian kings had passed, and with them, the direct thread to the earliest dawns of civilization. In this liminal moment, the soul of Babylon wrestled with its fading light, caught between remembrance and oblivion. The city, once the axis of the world, now stood at a crossroads, its fate a reflection of the eternal human struggle between holding fast and letting go. As new empires rose upon her ruins, Babylon whispered her final lament and last prayer, a sacred offering to the winds of change. And so, the great cycle turned again, death weaving seamlessly into the fabric of rebirth, loss folded into the promise of transformation. After the gates had closed, after the armies marched away, a deep silence settled over Babylon. Not the quiet of peace, but the hush of a long night. The city, once a blazing heart of civilization, now lay veiled beneath layers of dust and shadow, its stories slipping like water through trembling fingers. This was the time of hidden legacies, when the gods withdrew into silence and the earth held her breath. In these forgotten centuries, the riverbanks bore witness not to kings or conquerors, but to the slow unraveling of memory itself. Temples crumbled beneath creeping vines, scriptures faded in unread corners, the laughter of children vanished into the wind. Yet beneath this shroud, seeds of endurance took root. The spirit of Mesopotamia did not vanish. It hid, buried deep in whispered tales, in the fragments of language, in the rituals passed quietly from one generation to the next. This was the realm of shadow and waiting, a descent not into oblivion, but into a sacred pause where the past was neither alive nor dead, but suspended, waiting to be awakened. The silence was a trial, a test of endurance for the soul of a civilization. And in that trial, there is profound mystery, for it is in darkness that light is born anew. In absence, presence is rediscovered. Though the world forgot Babylon's name, her echoes persisted in the stars charted by distant astronomers, in the law codes inspiring future kings, in the very architecture of human thought. The long night was a passage, a quiet crucible where the old world was refined, waiting for the dawn that would reawaken her voice. In this sacred stillness, the story of humanity itself is whispered, that even in our darkest hours, the flame of meaning endures, held in the fragile hands of memory. From the depths of silence and shadow, a faint light stirred on the horizon, the first breath of a new dawn rising over ancient soil. Babylon's story, long whispered in the shadows, began to stir again, not as a fading echo, but as a living song. New peoples arrived, bringing with them the seeds of renewal. The Persians, the Greeks, and later the Parthians and Romans, each adding their voice to the chorus that hummed beneath the layers of time. They walked among the ruins with reverence, not merely as conquerors, but as students of a deep and sacred heritage. The great libraries and academies flourished once more, and the stars above Mesopotamia continued to guide curious eyes. Philosophers debated beneath the sky, astronomers charted the heavens with precision, and poets wove tales that bridged old myths and new truths. The wisdom of the ancients was no longer buried. It was resurrected, transformed by new hands, infused with fresh insight and wonder. In this rebirth, we see a profound truth, that civilizations are not fixed monuments, but living rivers. Their waters mingling, shifting, carrying the past into the future. The ancient gods may have faded from temples, but their stories, like the eternal rivers, continue to flow, to inspire, to shape the souls of those who listen. This dawn was not a return to what was, but a transformation into what could be, a sacred dance between memory and renewal, between loss and hope. And in the glow of this new light, Babylon's spirit lived on, not as a relic of time gone by, but as a wellspring of meaning, a reminder that from every fall comes the promise of rising again. Beneath the endless sky, beneath the turning stars that have watched over millennia, there is a sacred circle, an ancient rhythm pulsing through time itself. It is the rhythm of myth, the cadence of stories that rise and fall, fade and awaken anew. A cycle as eternal as the rivers that first nourished the earth. Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization, was the birthplace of this sacred dance. Her myths, woven from the fabric of gods and men, of chaos and order, life and death, move endlessly through the human heart. They vanish in one age, only to return in another, like the phoenix reborn from ash, like the seasons returning after winter's deep sleep. This eternal return is not mere repetition, but transformation, each telling a new breath, each hearing a new vision. The heroes of old, Gilgamesh, Ishtar, Marduk, live on, not as frozen idols, but as living symbols, guiding us through the labyrinth of existence. Their journeys echo in our own, the quest for meaning, the wrestling with fate, the longing for immortality. To understand Mesopotamia is to step into this sacred circle, to join the quiet pilgrimage of memory and myth. Here, time is not a line, but a spiral, ever returning, ever ascending, lifting us toward deeper understanding. And as we walk this circle, we remember that all stories are threads in a vast tapestry, woven through ages, lands, and souls. The myths of ancient rivers flow into our dreams, carrying with them the wisdom of countless generations. They remind us that in the heart of all endings lies the seed of new beginnings, and in the silence between the stars, the sacred story waits patiently for its next breath. In the twilight of an age, when the golden light of Mesopotamia's glory began to wane, the last kings ascended their thrones. Figures carved from ambition and desperation, cloaked in the heavy robes of fading power. They ruled over cities scarred by time, over lands worn thin by war and drought, their crowns heavy with the burden of a legacy slipping through their fingers. Nebuchadnezzar, the mighty, whose name still rings like thunder over Babylon's ruins, sought to grasp the last shards of splendor, to rebuild temples, to fortify walls, to etch his glory into stone. He dreamed of an empire eternal, a kingdom that would outlast even the gods themselves, but the gods, silent and inscrutable, watched with cold eyes. The arrogance of kings, their pride in monuments and armies, could not stem the tide of history. The land itself seemed to mourn, its rivers swelling with sorrow, its fields whispering of lost harvests. The final days unfolded slowly, not as the blaze of sudden destruction, but as a quiet, fading, a gentle unraveling. Foreign armies crept closer, new powers born from the shadows of empires, Persians, Medes, and then the inexorable march of time. The great city, once the center of the world, became a place of echoes. Echoes of power, of prayer, and of inevitable decline. In the faces of the last kings, we see the human struggle against impermanence, the desire to leave a mark, to outwit oblivion. Yet their fall teaches us a deeper truth, that power, however vast, is fragile, and that pride, however fierce, must bow to the eternal rhythm of rise and fall. The last kings of Mesopotamia were not failures, but figures in a sacred drama. Actors playing their part in the great unfolding. Their stories remind us that all things pass, that empires are but moments in the endless river of time, and that from every ending springs the seed of renewal. When the final walls of Babylon crumbled, when the once mighty ziggurats lay broken under silent skies, a hush fell over the land. A quiet aftermath, both mournful and mysterious. The dust settled slowly, blanketing the streets where kings once walked, where priests once intoned sacred chants, where the heartbeat of a civilization had pulsed strong. Yet even in this stillness, the echoes of memory stirred softly, like the distant murmur of a river beneath ice, waiting for the thaw. The myths, the stories, the sacred songs, they did not perish with stone and clay. They became the marrow of memory, the unseen threads woven into the fabric of later cultures. Travelers told tales of a great city beneath the desert sun, where gods once ruled and heroes walked the earth. These stories were spoken in new tongues, carried by traders and scribes across mountains and seas, transforming, adapting, enduring. The quiet aftermath was not mere silence. It was a sacred space where the spirit of Mesopotamia lingered, invisible yet palpable. In this liminal place, myth and history entwined, blurring the line between what was and what might be. The past became a mirror, reflecting not only the ancient world, but the eternal human yearning for connection, meaning, and transcendence. And so, even as the empire faded, its soul remained alive. In the dreams of poets, in the rituals of distant lands, in the very bones of civilization itself. The quiet aftermath is a testament that no fall is absolute, no ending final. From this sacred stillness, new stories arise, and the ancient pulse of Mesopotamia continues to beat within the heart of time. Across the vast expanse of time, Mesopotamia remains an eternal archive, not of dust and stone alone, but of human striving, hope, and the deep mysteries of existence. From the earliest tablets etched with cuneiform signs to the ruins whispered about by wandering travelers, her story endures. An archive written not only in words, but in the very pulse of civilization. Historians, poets, and seekers have peered into this archive, each reading the sacred script through the lens of their own age, each discovering anew the fragile beauty of a world long past. They see in Mesopotamia the birth of law, the dawn of written language, the first flickers of science and philosophy, yet they also glimpse the shadows, the fragility of power, the impermanence of glory, the tameless dance of creation and destruction. The legacy of Mesopotamia is neither simple nor static. It is a living dialogue between past and present, a conversation stretching across millennia. Her ancient cities may lie beneath sand and silence, but her spirit speaks still, in every code, every myth, every act of remembering. To gaze upon this archive is to face a profound truth, that history is not merely what was, but what we carry forward. The stories that shape our identity, the myths that give meaning to our lives. Mesopotamia teaches us that civilizations rise and fall, but the human quest for meaning endures, woven into the eternal fabric of time. And in this enduring archive, we find ourselves, part of an unbroken chain, carrying the flame from the dawn of history into the endless night ahead. In the hush of twilight, when the last light fades beyond the horizon, there is a fragile flame, a whisper of existence against the dark. This flame is mortality, the delicate spark that kindles all life and story. Mesopotamia's great cities, once ablaze with splendor, now rest beneath layers of earth and memory. Their flame extinguished in the physical world, yet glowing still within the human heart. To contemplate this last flame is to peer into the deepest mystery of being, the tension between the ephemeral and the eternal, between the fleeting breath and the lasting word. The kings who built ziggurats and carved laws knew their days were numbered, yet they strove to ignite a legacy, to kindle a light that would outlive their mortal years. Their efforts echo through time like distant firelight, flickering against the vast darkness, reminding us that to live is to seek meaning, to cast light upon the shadow of oblivion. Memory becomes the sacred hearth around which the living gather, passing stories from one generation to the next, keeping the flame alive. And though all things fade, empires, gods, even stars, the human spirit's yearning for remembrance endures, a flame passed hand to hand across the ages. In this quiet reflection, we find a profound grace, that mortality does not diminish meaning, but enhances it. The last flame burns not in defiance of death, but in celebration of life, a sacred glow illuminating the fragile beauty of our shared journey through time. The journey that began in the fertile plains between two rivers comes now to its sacred return, a homecoming not of place, but of spirit, where the scattered fragments of 1,000 years are gathered like fallen leaves beneath a great ancient tree. Wisdom, born in the clay tablets of Sumer, nurtured in the towering temples of Akkad and Babylon, is carried forward on the breath of history, woven into the tapestry of civilizations yet to come. It is a wisdom not bound by time, but alive in the rhythm of human inquiry, the ceaseless search for meaning amid the mystery of existence. The stories of gods and kings, of flood and renewal, have seeped into the soil of cultures far beyond the Tigris and Euphrates, teaching us that creation and destruction are twin flames, that power is transient, and that the soul's true kingdom lies in understanding and compassion. To come home is to recognize ourselves in these ancient tales, to hear in their echoes the timeless call of humanity. To build, to dream, to endure. The legacy of Mesopotamia is thus a gift, a sacred inheritance reminding us that we are part of a vast continuum, that the past lives within us, and that in every ending there is a beginning. As the rivers flow endlessly onward, so too does the wisdom of the ancients carry us gently forward, guiding the footsteps of all who listen on the eternal path of becoming. In this homecoming, we find the deepest truth of all, that to remember is to live and to carry. Wisdom is to honor the sacred fire within us all. As the sun sinks beneath the horizon of ancient lands, the story of Mesopotamia does not end. It unfolds into an endless journey, stretching beyond the cradle of civilization, beyond the shifting sands and broken walls. This journey is the pulse of humanity itself, an ever-flowing river of stories, dreams, and striving, carrying us through time and space across the continents of thought and being. From the Fertile Crescent, the seeds of knowledge were cast wide. Mathematics, writing, law, and myth rooted deep in the soil of the human soul. These seeds blossomed into countless civilizations, each drawing from the ancient wells, each adding their own song to the great chorus. The echoes of Gilgamesh's quest, the shadow of the flood's cleansing waters, the wisdom carved in stone tablets, all become part of the shared heritage that shapes who we are today. And yet, this journey asks us to remember that no empire lasts forever, no glory is immune to the passage of time. It calls us to humility, to reverence for the fragile beauty of life, and to a deep understanding that we are but threads in a vast and sacred tapestry. The story of Mesopotamia is thus a mirror, reflecting the eternal human condition, The dance between light and shadow, between memory and forgetting, between the fleeting moment and the infinite. As we step forward, we carry the flame of this ancient world, not as a burden, but as a gift, a guiding light on the endless path. And so the journey continues, always unfolding, always becoming, an eternal voyage into the heart of meaning itself. Beneath the towering ruins and cracked tablets, beneath the grand tales of kings and gods, lie the whispers of countless lives, the silent, unseen souls who tilled the earth, who shaped clay with calloused hands, who dreamed beneath the same stars that watched empires rise and fall. Their stories do not thunder through history's halls. They are quiet, fragile echoes, the soft footfalls of mothers, farmers, artisans, and children woven into the very fabric of Mesopotamia's being. In the dust of ancient streets, we hear their breaths. A mother's lullaby carried on the breeze, the murmur of prayers in fading temples, the laughter of children chasing shadows beneath date palms. These lives, often lost to time's great narrative, remind us that history is not only the tale of power, but the sacred mosaic of ordinary hearts. They teach us that the meaning of a civilization is not only in its monuments or conquests, but in the simple, enduring acts of daily life. The weaving of cloth, the planting of seeds, the telling of stories by firelight. In their silence, they speak a profound truth that every human life, no matter how humble, carries the spark of the divine, the sacred flame of memory and hope. To listen to these whispers is to honor the fullness of history, to hold the vastness of human experience in gentle hands, and to remember that we are all part of this eternal story, woven together across time in the sacred tapestry of being. Listen. The rivers sing their ancient song, a melody older than memory itself, flowing endlessly through the heart of Mesopotamia, carrying whispers of time upon their currents. The Tigris and Euphrates, twin serpents of water and life, wove through the land like veins of the earth, nurturing the roots of civilization and bearing witness to the rise and fall of kingdoms. Their song is one of ceaseless motion, a gentle hymn of continuity and change, reminding us that all things flow, that nothing remains still, and that time itself is a river we cannot halt. The water laps at the shores of ancient memory, washing away the dust of centuries, yet preserving the essence beneath, the pulse of life, the echo of human endeavor. In their currents, we hear the laughter of children long gone, the footsteps of priests and kings, the silent prayers of those who sought meaning beneath the vast sky. The river's song is a sacred chant, a call to humility before the great unfolding, a reminder that every moment is part of a larger whole. As the waters move onward, carrying the stories of countless generations, they teach us to embrace both the joy and sorrow of impermanence, to honor the past even as we step into the unknown future. In the eternal flow of the rivers, we glimpse the dance of life itself, an endless journey of becoming, where beginnings and endings entwine in a sacred embrace. And so we listen to the river's song, letting its timeless rhythm guide us home. In the boundless night, where darkness cradles the faintest glimmers, the stars stand as silent sentinels, celestial guardians of fate and memory, watching over the ancient land of Mesopotamia. These pinpricks of light, burning with cold, eternal fire, have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the whispered prayers of kings, the laughter and tears of common folk. To the ancients, the stars were not mere distant fires. They were living beings, gods in their own right, writing destinies in the ink-black sky, mapping the paths of heroes and mortals alike. They served as guides across desert sands and turbulent seas, and as cosmic mirrors reflecting the order and chaos of the world below. Each constellation carried a story, a myth woven from divine struggle, love, and loss. The great bull of heaven, the archer, the scorpion, all part of a grand celestial narrative that echoed the rhythms of earth and soul. By tracing these luminous patterns, the people of Mesopotamia glimpsed the infinite, a sacred connection between heaven and earth, between the mortal and the divine. The stars remind us that our lives are threads in a vast cosmic tapestry, each moment intertwined with the eternal dance of the universe. They teach us to embrace our place in the unfolding story, to recognize the mystery beyond our grasp, and to find comfort in the knowledge that even in darkness there is light, a guiding presence, steadfast and eternal. As we look upward, we join the countless eyes that have gazed before us, finding in the stars a reflection of our own longing, our own yearning for meaning, and the unending hope for transcendence. In the heart of the ancient city, amid the crumbled stones and shattered pillars, there stands a silent temple, a place where time itself seems to pause and the spirit of a vanished world breathes softly. Here, the air is thick with echoes. Whispers of prayers once lifted toward the sky, the faint scent of incense lingering like a memory, and the gentle murmur of devotion folded into stone. The temple is more than a building. It is a sacred threshold, a meeting place between the mortal and the divine, between the fleeting moment and eternity. Within these walls, centuries collapse into a single breath, and the voices of priests, kings, and worshippers rise again like a sacred chorus. Time folds inward here, as if the temple itself were a living being, holding the past in its bones, cradling the future in its silence. It is a reminder that history is not only written in texts or taught in classrooms, but felt deeply in the places where spirit and flesh once met, where human hands shaped the sacred and the divine touched the earth. The silent temple calls us to pause, to listen beyond the noise of the present, and to honor the sacred in all things, the sacred in ruins, in memory, in the fragile breath of being. In this stillness, we find a space to reflect, to glimpse the eternal within the transient, to sense the unbroken thread that ties us to those who came before and to those who will come after. The temple stands as a silent witness, a guardian of the sacred flame, a place where time and spirit meet, and where the soul may find rest. And so, as the final echoes drift softly through the ages, Mesopotamia's sacred story folds into the quietude of memory, a lingering breath upon the vast canvas of time. This tale, woven from clay and spirit, from rivers that cradle life and deserts that test endurance, has shaped the contours of our shared human journey. It is a story of creation and destruction, of gods and mortals entwined in eternal dance, of light flickering bravely against the ever-looming shadow. Through its rise and fall, we glimpse the fragile nature of power, the inexorable flow of change, and the enduring quest for meaning that defines us all. Mesopotamia teaches us to hold history with reverence, not as a distant chronicle of names and dates, but as a living wellspring of wisdom and mystery. In her ruins, we hear the whispered prayers of those who came before, their hopes and fears etched into stone and story, calling us to remember our place within the great arc of time. The final echo is not an end, but a beginning. An invitation to carry forward the flame, to listen deeply to the sacred rhythms of life, and to walk humbly upon the earth, aware of the delicate threads that bind us across the ages. As the stars wheel overhead and the rivers continue their endless song, we join in the eternal chorus, a single note in the grand symphony of existence, echoing the ancient heartbeats of Mesopotamia and the timeless spirit of humanity itself.